last game is a great one. Can't wait to get to this because speaking of another underperforming team and talk about mismanagement, I think there are a lot of parallels between many of these teams that we've hit on today on the podcast and this last one in regards to the matchup itself. One of them is no exception because the Dodgers are relatable to the Yankees as they've sustained some injuries, especially in their bullpen, that has impacted their recent results. Injuries, generally speaking, because the Yankees have, for the most part, a healthy-ish bullpen. Their lineup has been banged up. That's been their biggest concern on top of the rotation. I don't think Rodon has made a start yet for New York, even though he's been coming back for the last week, last 2 weeks, last 3 weeks. That is seemingly the story for Carlos Rodon going back to his entire career. 5, 6, 7 years, going back to his White Sox days. White Sox, we could say for another conversation for another day. But Clayton Kershaw taking on Reed Detmers in this individual matchup. And the Angels, even though they haven't made up much ground in the AL West standings, they, I believe, are in the AL wild card race when it comes to having one of those spots as of now, one of the 3 spots. They are no longer trailing in the American League wildcard race. And the Dodgers are actually between a -130, -140 favorite, despite getting swept against the Giants. And the Dodgers bullpen injuries played a big role in that regard over the weekend, especially on Friday, blowing a 4-0 lead. And the comparison I was going to make on top of the Yankees injuries was the St. Louis Cardinals, because the Cardinals didn't address their pitching concerns coming into the season for the most part, and the Dodgers did not address their bullpen concerns. And it is coming back to haunt them a bit of late here, even though the market still likes LA. Kind of similar to St. Louis in that regard too. So how are you betting Dodgers Angels here, Mo?
Unfortunately, fading my beloved Angels here. Yeah, the Dodgers, they've been, even though like I've talked a lot about how the Angels have smashed lefties all year, and we don't really talk about the Dodgers as being a strong lineup against lefties because they've actually been much better against right-handed pitching in recent years. But after kind of a slow start, they've been better than the Angels this year against lefties, actually, as strong as the Angels have been. So that's definitely a point in their favor in this lefty-lefty matchup here. They also have the better pitcher by quite a bit here. I like Reed Detmers, and I've bet him a lot in the past, but he's a solid, slightly above average pitcher, but I still have him projected around a 4 ERA. He's been a bit unlucky this year, I think. Possibly his defense has let him down in some spots. But Clayton Kershaw, this guy, nobody ever talks about how, everyone always talks about how ageless some of these other guys are, Justin Verlander, Max Scherzer. Nobody talks about how Clayton Kershaw is still not only performing, but projecting at an elite level, near a 3 ERA at age, 35, 36. I still think he's, Tom Tango has him as the Cy Young favorite by a good amount, I think. So I am still skeptical of that due to my feeling that he's inevitably going to go on the IL, but regardless, he's been great, and he's projecting great as well. So a pretty big pitching advantage, even though Detmers is solid, and then a pretty small, but I think better than the numbers would say, batting advantage. I say that because the Angels are once again dealing with multiple position player injuries. It's not the Mike Trouts and the Shohei Ohtanis at the top of the lineup. That is not the issue, but missing Gio Urshela, he's been mediocre this year, but has been a good hitter against lefties in his career. So I think that does affect them when they face a left-handed pitcher. Anthony Rendon, once again on the IL. You want to talk about the Carlos Rodon of batting. Like I said in the Discord,
The
Rendon
Carlos
to the IL.
Rodon of batting. I love it. So
Rendon
true.
to the IL, drink. I mean, this guy is just never ending with him. And while he has been hurt and struggled some, I mean, I think he's been a roughly average batter this year, but he has a 360 xWOBA this year. I mean, so I think it affects their projection for sure against a lefty here. And Zach Neto went on the IL last week. He's been great for them. Okay defense, and his bat has been tremendous for them, especially considering his position, So the bottom of the lineup, I guess what I'm saying is a bit of a mess for the Angels. And specifically in this matchup too, I know that they've been very good overall against lefties, and they project to hit lefties a bit better because of guys like Hunter Renfroe and Brandon Drury. But specifically against left-handed sliders, I was checking into this because Kershaw, we know he's so slider heavy. 292 xWOBA against left-handed sliders, not too much better on the actual production as well. So I think it's a decent spot for Kershaw to do a little better than the projections think. And I thought the Dodgers should be closer to minus 140 here, even though they are facing a good pitcher and a good lineup here. But this one really hasn't moved, so I don't anticipate this one getting bet too much. So people should still be able to get about what I got, which was minus 130.
Well, I do want to challenge you a little bit on that. Not the pick, because I agree with your analysis there. But the market movement, not just when it comes to money line, but total even and props. I kind of want to throw some things at you and try to get your perspective on it. So when it comes to the money line market, the Angels were actually opened as high, very soft opener, you could say, but opened as high as around plus 130 yesterday afternoon. So they did open as bigger dogs. Money came in as it generally happens. It's not like you don't see any baseball dog get shortened by 20 cents. It happens with soft openers. And generally speaking, when Mo brings up a market like the money line odds for any baseball game, we're going to be talking about the consensus odds where they opened, which would be in their latter part of the evening when most sports books, other than the few that open soft openers, especially nationwide books, because DraftKings, FanDuel, usually the books to open first, and those are soft openers, aka lower limits on those markets. But I digress. Going back to the total on top of the money line, the total opened at 9. It was actually bet down to 8, juiced 8 towards the over, but still minus 120 over 8. So even money for the under, back up to 9 now. And in terms of props here, especially for pitchers, in regards to the way you're thinking about this game, it somewhat correlates because Reed Detmers, who's going for the Angels, his over-under outs prop, so outs recorded, first opened at 17.5, and it was juiced towards the under expectedly, which would be, quick math here, would be 5 innings or less. Correct me if I'm wrong there.
Less than 6.
Less than 6, right. Less than 6 innings for Detmers. And now it's down to 16.5. Over is juiced to minus 140, under minus 105. So you gave your take on the money line. You like the Dodgers. So whether it's the total, and total also is a chunk of the way you expect the pitching matchup to go between Kershaw, a Cy Young candidate, which you hit on, and also Reed Detmers, and your expectations for him in this start against a Dodgers lineup that has performed a lot better of late against left-handed pitching. So whether it's the Detmers prop, even Detmers walks, which has gotten bet up when it comes to the over there in that market. I brought up a lot of different markets. So however you want to take this, Mo, from anything I've thrown at you over the last minute or so.
Yeah, I did see that the Dodgers the Angels rather got steamed overnight, which I think is what created the value that I think is there on the Dodgers. So obviously hoping that was a little bit of a fake from the sharps. We see that all the time where there is a move down and then sometimes they hammer the other side. But out of these kind of like, I would be interested in Dodgers team total over, I think, especially if, like you said, if we're looking at a shorter Reed Detmers outing, the Angels' middle relief is pretty pitiful at times, as we saw when they completely imploded against the Royals, and then even struggling in multiple games against the Royals, even in games where they won, just allowing multiple base runners and then having to get out of jams repeatedly.
And looking at this thing, I also want to pick your brain on this. I know this podcast is usually 10 to 15 minutes, but baseball season is starting to heat up and NBA season is over. And maybe we'll clip this game off separately versus the entire baseball podcast. But looking at this thing spot-wise, because we haven't really talked about situational spots, and every handicapper looks at this thing differently. So I'm kind of curious to pick your brain, especially for this. And maybe it applies to more of the Cincinnati Reds because they've won 9 straight games. But you have to think the Dodgers it's an 162 game season. I kind of want to ultra preface here because I am not saying back the Dodgers just because they were swept by the San Francisco Giants over the weekend. Not saying that by any means. So please don't take this out of context. The Angels have been playing very good baseball of late. Therefore, from a market rating standpoint and from a price perspective, the market is backing the Angels for good reason. They are playing better baseball, and the market sees value in a team for many other reasons on top of this one that is starting to heat up. And like you mentioned, they have one of the better offenses in the game. We hit on that last week in the couple of breakdowns that we did, even without Anthony Rendon in the lineup. That goes without saying, with the odds on and then some AL MVP favorite. We also did a separate video on that you can find on the Lines YouTube page. Just search the Lines on YouTube. So an elite Angels lineup coupled with an Angels pitching staff and bullpen to an extent that has performed a bit better of late. The Dodgers, on top of the Giants getting swept by them over the weekend, have performed worse. So the market is a bit lower on them. Do you agree with that notion at the least? Again, situational spot-wise, I am not saying going as far as that over the course of a 162-game season, but do you see where I'm going with my logic there, Mo?
Not something I usually pay much attention to just because, it's different from like basketball where like, okay, you can play harder in basketball, right? And like bring more energy, and that's going to like do things for you.
But maybe market price. Let's say the Dodgers, because I don't think you would disagree with this. If the Dodgers were their usual 15 or 16 games over 500 at this point, they're not minus 130 favorites. I'm not saying it's going to be drastically different considering how I'm not discrediting the Angels. If you look at base runs on Fangraphs, the Angels are one of the best teams in baseball. And I think your future might be live at this point, especially if DeGrom isn't going to come back this year for Texas. So from that standpoint, record-wise, are you with me that if the Dodgers were playing better, 15, 16 games over 500, something along those lines, they're not this cheap or around this price?
Yeah, I think the market definitely does react to those things at times. Like, you're definitely seeing it, I think, with Cincinnati. I mean, plug all these same players into Cincinnati 2 months ago, and there's absolutely no way they're like pushing minus 200 in multiple games. I know it's the Rockies and the Royals, but still, I think that you do sometimes find some value fading hot teams, if that's what you're getting at.
Overvalued teams. And
yeah.
And that may not come to fruition tonight. Not that your analysis revolved around fade the hot team. That's not what you're implying by any means, and I'm not trying to insinuate that at all. I was just bringing up another angle that some handicappers might incorporate, and not really from a situational spot perspective, even though some handicappers do incorporate that. I was more so meaning it from the market devaluing the Dodgers because of their struggles, to the point where it's also created a little bit of value from that angle.
Yeah, and I think you've seen it all year with the Orioles, how the market really does tend to be slow, though, to be honest. Like, overall, like the Orioles, I mean, you just, every day you look up and when they're playing somebody decent and they were still plus 140 for 2 months, So I think the market still doesn't really believe in the Orioles, to be honest. But yeah.
How could you?
I mean, I think I don't necessarily right now with their injuries, but I do think this is a very, very good lineup when they're healthy.
And bullpen.
Yeah, I mean, it's great, but like these guys have an ERA of 1.7 or what. I mean, that can't possibly continue, one would think. But yeah, the Orioles are a very interesting team because of the way. I mean, when outside of their top guys, the bullpen's been atrocious, I think. So
yeah, for sure. When in terms of holding on to a lead, and then you factor in Bautista alone in the ninth, that's I'm not saying he may not give up a run here or there over the next month or so. That happens with any reliever, a given blown save here or there. But that's real. His stuff is real, and we saw that going back to last year too.
Yeah, absolutely. Except for Alexis Diaz. He'll never give up a run.
No spite at all there. Anything else, Mo, on Dodgers Angels or the market in general? Because I think it's a fascinating conversation we are having here, and we don't really get to it that often, and we'll probably get to it more now that the NBA and NHL have wrapped up and people are starting to get more into baseball betting.
Not really, especially I would say I'm a little down right now on, like I said, what the Angels are running out there. We'll see how things progress for them injury-wise and if Mike Trout remembers how to hit a baseball.